This is what we are disagreeing about. My point. Ancient Egypt was a multicultural and multi-ethnic civilization due to its geolocation connecting the Middle East, Africa, Asia and Europe, a strategic location on the crossroad of continents, flourishing around the Nile River, which was a cultural conduit of civilization. Therefore, there is diversity on the skin of the Egyptians. Throughout time and location, the ethnic percentages will vary depending on era and region. According to the results of my research, the majority of ancient Egyptians would have had an olive skin, with a lower percentage of black individuals living mostly in the southern areas of Egypt, and some white settlers and white ruling elite during the later periods. The ancient Egyptians were a multi-ethnic African civilization, and their ethnicity was inextricably tied to their geographic location.
Metatron's argument emphasizes Egypt's geolocation as the primary factor driving its multiculturalism. It is essential to recognize that this view overlooks a range of other influential factors: cultural exchange. The author's argument primarily focuses on geography as a conduit of civilization, but downplays or fails to show an understanding of the significance the domestic cultural entanglement between Nubians and Egyptians played in the formation of Egypt. Dr. Soketa explains there was no time when foreigners migrated to Egypt for any reason and were not met by the indigenous occupants of the land. Metatron should realize if his Mediterranean ancestors could make it to Egypt, indigenous black African tribes could do the same. There's no reason to believe black Egyptians were relegated to the south, as Metatron claims. Lack of archaeological evidence. The assertion that the majority of ancient Egyptians would have had olive skin, or that the ethnic percentages will vary depending on era and region, requires concrete archaeological evidence. Ethnicity is a complex and multifaceted aspect of a society that cannot be deduced solely from geography. The Egyptian standard representation of themselves was in a brownish-red hue, not olive. We also find individuals in ancient Egypt who called themselves Kim, which means black in ancient Egyptian. Herman Ranke noted these name types to be attributes representing physical qualities. I suggest you read Aylward Blackman's work on the rock tombs of Mayer to see more ancient Egyptians calling themselves black. Ancient Egypt's location in the northeastern part of Africa, along the Mediterranean coast, is emphasized to suggest that it was distanced from the sub-Saharan regions with predominantly black populations. This geographic separation is used to argue that due to limited interaction with these areas, the ancient Egyptian population did not have a significant black ethnic component. This assertion displays a gross misunderstanding of the term and geography of Nubia. Nubia was a region where Egyptians could find gold. Portions of Nubia fell within the borders of Egypt, so this separation between Nubians and Egyptians, as if they were two different races, appears to Nubiologists like Aaron de Souza to be a manufactured pseudo-reality forged by Egyptology in the weaponization or in systematic misreadings of an Egyptian term, Nehesi. Egyptologists translated Nehesi as Negro, confusing people like Metatron into thinking Nubians were Negroes and Egyptians were not. In actuality, the term Nehesi should be read as Southern, not Negro. Nubians and Egyptians shared biological affinities that arrived as a result of the cultural entanglement between Nakata I and the Nubia A group. These pre-dynastic cultures share the foundational elements of civilization as they both employed the exact same symbols for kingship before writing had developed. In pre-dynastic times, there was not much value in the Delta. Egypt was unified and founded in what we know as Egyptian Nubia today. In his rebuttal to Greeks calling Egyptians black, Metatron shows a full display of intellectual dishonesty by attempting to mount a polemic against Black Egypt with attestations from the time period of Greek Egypt and later after 332 BC. This is significant because when Egypt gets taken over by foreign rulers, the native rulers often flee to the south, to Thebes or Southmore. Before the Greeks took over Egypt, there were Persians, Assyrians, Libyans, and the people who became known as the Hyksos reigning on the Egyptian throne. These empires affected the contingency of who constituted the ancient Egyptians at later times. So did later empires who conquered Egypt. Before these invasions, most Greek sources said Egyptians were black. Metatron intentionally avoided these sources and limited his Greek source material to attestations from after these invasions.
I have a plethora of problems with your fixation of the word Kemet, which is also a common trait among Afrocentrists. Now, I myself have used the word Kemet on occasion. It's not that the word is wrong, but fixating on it has zero linguistic standing. Let me elaborate. First and foremost, do you always use the correct and appropriate term for describing a nation? Do you say Japan? Wrong, it's Nihon. Do you say China? Wrong, it's Zhongguo. Do you say Germany? Wrong, it's Deutschland. Also, for reference, linguistically speaking, Ancient Egyptian is an Afro-Asiatic language, and it does not have, for as much as we understand, Southern African origins. It's Kamito-Semitic. It's Kamito-Semitic.
Now, Ancient Egyptian belonged to the Afro-Asiatic language family. Small digression here. There is an older name for the Afro-Asiatic family, a horrendously bad name. The alternative name, Hamito-Semitic.
It's Kamito-Semitic.
You recognize the name Ham, of course, here in Hamito. To still use that name today is to perpetuate the horrific invention by racists of a myth.
It's Kamito-Semitic.
A myth used to justify enslaving Africans. And it's the slaver's own myth. It's not truly biblical. That Ham was the ancestor of all Africans, so they could get the Africans they wanted into their myth. That God had passed Noah's curse on to Ham's supposed descendants by giving them dark skins.
Dark skin? It's a stark contradiction for Metatron to use the antiquated term Hamito-Semitic and then deny the dark skin of the Hamites from the pseudo-biblical curse of Ham.
Geographically, Asia is physically connected to Africa, which is something that people seem to forget.
The Afro-Asiatic language phylum consists of 5 indigenous African language groups, and only one is Asiatic, that's Semitic. Metatron misrepresents the relevance of the Asiatic in the term Afro-Asiatic. The Afro-Asiatic language group was started in the Horn of Africa.
Also, when you say Kemet, you're using the so-called E of convention used by Egyptologists when they don't know how to vocalize consonants. But the fact that archaeologists use it doesn't mean that that's the correct way to pronounce it. They're archaeologists, not linguists. To reconstruct ancient Egyptian, we need to vocalize it through Coptic and loanwords in Hebrew and in Greek, similarly to how classical Latin has been reconstructed, and throughout the transcription of cuneiform script of the Neo-Babylonian period and Assyrian. Also building with the similarities of the Saitic dialect, we know that linguistically speaking the pronunciation Kemet has no academic linguistic dignity. It clearly comes from the Coptic pronunciation Kem and Kemi in the Boairic dialect. The long air in open syllable in that specific position helps us understand that most likely in classical Egyptian we have a U in that position. So if we really want to be precise, then the correct and most likely pronunciation in ancient Egyptian, specifically in classical Egyptian, is Kumat, Kumatu, nominative, Kumata, accusative, and Kumati, oblique genitive.
Incorrect conjecture with no source material to back it up. I'll offer Metatron a lesson in Coptic morphology, written by Professor Sandro Capocicci.
Coptic verbal morphology. A reader unfamiliar with Coptic grammar may assume that one is dealing with two completely different words, such as French blue and fatty, BL versus barrel, which have neither the same number of consonants, nor the same vowels. Unfortunately, Fama seems unaware that Egyptian and Coptic have a verbal morphology largely based on a high degree of apophony. These languages have a verbal morphology consisting of a root made up of a consonant sequence providing lexical information and a template, a mold made of a fixed number of consonants and a particular vowel sequence providing grammatical information. One root can be associated with different templates giving it different grammatical functions. For example, the root /km/ in Coptic is associated with darkness. The CCC template associates this root and others with the infinitive. Thus, when associated with this template, the root km becomes quam/kmm/ become black xm becomes xmm in Boheric. The root hm associated with heat, when associated with the template CCC, is realized as /hem/get hot. This is what Fowler seems to have understood in a later work, Fowler 2050. Should we to conclude that Kem, Shami and their ancestor KMT Egypt had nothing to do with the color black? The answer is no. Coptic, although descended from Pharaonic Egyptian, differs from it in several ways. And in this case, the adjectives derived from km, to be black in Coptic, are obviously derived from words belonging to other grammatical categories of the late hieroglyphic Egyptian language. We know this for several reasons. First of all, the hieroglyphic feminine marker of nouns and adjectives T has historically been lost, leaving its absence to regularly match with the final vowel /e/ in Coptic Sahidic and /i/ in Boheric. We can see it with the examples in 1. If came, Zame came from a word only combining km with t, one would expect their final vowel to be /i, which it is not the case.
The evidence of pre-Coptic Egyptian, we are more likely to be in the presence of a word from another grammatical category derived from the root Clark km. If the hypothesis of kmt deriving from an adjective was true, one could expect a asterisk kem/asterisk xem form as a masculine adjective, and kem ximi as a feminine adjective, which we do not have. However, we find the Greek transcription archimis of the Egyptian theonym harpe km horis, the black, or black km, is transcribed by xm, which confirms the existence of an adjective in pre-Coptic. Vesicle, 1984-81, who noted this fact, reports that this vocalization, which did not survive for the root /km/, survived for other pharaonic adjectives in Coptic. This is the case with the name of WB, a type of ancient Egyptian priest whose name was derived from the adjective bipuri, and which in Coptic gave /weeb/ in Saitic and /web/ in Boheric. Another argument confirming this fact comes from the testimony of the Latin-speaking Greek writer Plutarch, who lived during the first 2 centuries of the Christian era. In chapter 33 of his work Isis and Osiris, Plutarch explains in these terms the meaning of the name of the country of the ancient Egyptians in the language of the latter. In addition, we name Egypt because its lands are black among all, like the black of the eye, Chemia. In this sentence, Plutarch teaches us that the name of Egypt was Chemia, which strongly resembles the Boharic form of the term, which as we have seen is /zemi/. We also learn from this text that in Plutarch's time, ancient Egyptians considered that the name of their country /zemi/ was linked to the black color, more precisely the color of the earth in this country, described as the blackest among all. Interestingly, this connection was also made, according to the author, through the relation between the name of Egypt and the black of the eye, that is to say, the pupil. Why this reference to this black reality rather than to another? Because there was, in hieroglyphic Egyptian, a word kmt derived from the root km, blackfu meaning the pupil. Like the name of Egypt, because it was derived from the root km black, it could only have been a nominalized adjective. Plutarch in his Egyptian Informants reference to the black eye rather than hair or some other black reality was motivated by the fact that the 2 terms were perfect homophones, which one might have expected since they both were nominalized feminine gender adjectives. We therefore have an additional argument for the vocalization of adjectives formed from km black with a /e/ in pre-Coptic, and therefore the formation of the name of Egypt through this process. Fuma's argument relating to the different vocalization of the name of Egypt and of the verbs and adjectives associated with the color black in Coptic does not hold, since an identical vocalization is attested for another feminine noun derived from an adjective in Pharaonic Egyptian.
Now let's discuss this hieroglyphic inscription that you present as evidence that Kemet or Kumat in fact meant land of the black, according to you.
The Egyptians were called Kemits. and Egypt was called Kemet, the land of the black.
Does it apply to the people or to the land? Probably the fertile soil.
No, it is not the black color of the Nile silt, which is mentioned as some archaeologists claim, but the color of the skin of the people living there. When we speak of white country, we are not referring to the color of the snow in the Alps.
And also very likely by extension to the skin color of the originators of those words. Yes, you can translate it to the black land, and as scholars agree, it refers to the fertile soil. Diop found a place where Kemet was followed by a man and a woman sitting and 3 dots. So you take Kemet, which means the black, plus people, literally it means the black people.
We have Kemet followed by a man and a woman sitting with 3 dots. This is the determinative meaning humanity, but to you it must mean black people. First of all, the adjectival noun in plural form, Kemetiu, just means Egyptians. Kemet or Kumat just means black land, not the land of the black, as opposed to the red land of the desert. The thing is, though, that if this means black land, and this is people, why can it not be then black people? Well, this is an answer that you don't need an Egyptologist or a fully qualified linguist, you just need a first-year student to answer. Differently from English, in Egyptian, the adjective goes after the noun.
It appears this first-year student Metatron, referred to for teachings in Egyptian grammar, is not aware that determinatives are not nouns. Kemet is a noun formed from the color adjective kem for black. The A1, B1, and Z2 determinatives are only classifiers that show the word category. They help us determine the category of the word. So Kemet is a derivative of black by adding the feminized T suffix and the category of the term of people. What Egyptologists do is divorce the meaning of the root term when this nisba, Kemetiu, is formed. This does not follow the rules of Egyptian grammar, but it allows some to say Kemetiu simply means Egyptians by not acknowledging the blackness in the root term Kem. Metatron is grossly incorrect and has just displayed folly trying to explain away the blackness at the root of the term Kemet. Determinatives are not nouns in the ancient Egyptian language, and they are not part of the ancient Egyptian syntax.
But often Egyptian words had determinatives or classifiers. So for example, you can see in the top row, the seated man. You want to write the word for man, you use the bolt sign. So if we go back to our single consonantal signs and you look down the left, about 2/3 of the way down, you'll see that there's a door bolt sign that stands for the sound S, so the S sound. And we use that followed by this determinative of a seated man in the stroke, and that's how they write the word for man.
Differently from English, in Egyptian, the adjective goes after the noun.
Determinatives are not nouns in the ancient Egyptian language, and they are not part of the ancient Egyptian syntax.
It is in predicative form, not in attributive form. So in this language, it makes no sense to say first black and then men and women. If they wanted to say black people, they would write it the other way around.
Determinatives are not nouns in the ancient Egyptian language, and they are not part of the ancient Egyptian syntax.
And it just so happens that my language, Italian, functions the exact same way. In the majority of cases, the adjective follows the noun. It's after the noun, and it will make no sense to say, in fact, just like in English, black people. The ancient Egyptians would have said people black, but they don't.
I suggest you read Life in a Multicultural Society, Egypt from Cambyses to Constantine and Beyond, edited by Janet Johnson. In it, you'll find attestations to a phrase used in 2 demotic papyri. The phrase was Remechkem. This means black man. The physical characteristics of 2 Egyptian contractors were recorded during the Greek time period. Lastly, I agree with Metatron that ancient Egypt was a multicultural society because of what transpired over its 3,000-year history. But the fact remains that the foundational elements of Egyptian culture came from the south. Egypt was founded in Egyptian Nubia, not in the Delta. Tasseti was far away from the so-called crossroads of civilization that Mediterraneans and Levantites suffering from famine would traverse to reach the abundance of the land of the black, Kemet. This video was produced by Jonathan Owens of the Madjai Archers. This is for educational purposes only. If you would like to support this work, please send your generous donations to Smash Rock at Cash App